Street apologists. Street apologists. Street apologists. On the radio.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Street Apologists Live. I'm your host, Vocab Malone. Today is Sunday, January 19th, 2020. It's what we call Sanctity of Life Sunday. I've been doing a lot of pro-life type of content, as you well know if you follow the channel recently. It's that time of year. But I haven't done anything live where I'm sitting down streaming on this topic, especially with a guest. And so I'd like to introduce to you tonight, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. James Umber. He is the guest tonight on Street Apologists Live, where we look into the overlooked and we serve the underserved. Put your hands together for Mr. James Umber. Woo! Oh, yeah, just a second, I'll let you see his face. Oh, that's in the way. Oops, my bad. Let me get that out of the way. Oh, that's the wrong screen. Anyway, hold on. There we go. All right. That's what we worked on before. Okay. So, two things are going to happen, James. A lot of people are going to come on tonight and complain that I have shades on. Every time I wear shades, somebody complains. And I always time them out. If they are too insistent, if it bothers them that bad, I just block them.
Nice.
But there's a special reason I got these shades on. I want you guys to look very closely. Do you recognize that symbol, James?
Yeah.
What
it's
is
the rebellion?
See, James knows us up.
Oh, man.
So if you had to guess, based upon the color scheme and the etching, what character is shades?
I'm going to mess this up.
Are you serious?
I'm going to mess this up. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, Nate, can you guess what character shades would these, what vein or what tradition are these in here, bro? Nate should know. These are $20, by the way. I never buy expensive shades because guess what? Every time I lose them or break them, I always buy under 20.
Yep. Very
Very rarely do they go higher. Yeah, it's Star Wars, but what character?
What character?
Yeah, so I'll let people guess that. So we're going to have people come in the live chat. And guys, will you hit a 1 if you can hear me? And now we need to find out. Oh, you're saying it's blurry? Okay.
Uh-oh.
Let me mess around with something here and see. Well, I don't know what the deal is. If it's blurry for anybody else, I'll do some things I'll mess around with and find out what's going on. But it is what it is right now. Okay, now we're going to find out, can we hear James? James, tell everybody a little bit about yourself, please, brother, and welcome again to the show.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here. Well, let's see here. I am actually originally, my undergraduate is in architecture. And so I worked in the field of architecture for about 14 years and had the, honor to be able to design some buildings, got to do some fun stuff there. But ultimately, all along, I saw that there were these deeper questions that needed to be dealt with. And I started to research on my own philosophy and science, starting to look into the evidence for Christianity. And I started to see that this was so much more important, and my church and other places really needed to see this evidence. So I went to Biola, got my MA in apologetics, basically philosophy of religion, and studied those issues. And now I'm doing ministry work on the ASU campus with an organization called Ratio Christi. So I'm a campus apologist.
See the shirt?
There we go.
There you go.
Yeah.
We did a fist bump too.
There we go.
See the shirt, everybody?
So just got that made. But yeah, so we've got a group there at ASU. We're studying the issue of evolution. We're studying the evidence for the existence of God. We're going to be looking into the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. So we're hitting all sorts of important issues that these students don't usually get to wrestle with in the same way that we do in open discussion there in Ratio Christi.
That's excellent. And they're hitting 1 on there. That means they can hear you fine.
Excellent.
So this is the first time I've had a guest in studio where we've both had headphones on. I don't know if you guys know that. And the reason is because I finally got a splitter so I can do it. And I finally have 2 sets of headphones. And so thank you very much to the person who made that possible. So here we go. And Peacemaker says, nice to meet you, Mr. Umber. God bless you. So you got friends
Thank
already. Jesus Garcia says, hello from Los Angeles. So there you go, man. No one guessed. These are R2-D2 shades.
Oh, I see now.
He's blue
now
and
I
white.
get it.
That's a color scheme.
I'm sitting there thinking of human characters.
Star Wars, man. Why you can't
You can't limit yourself just to humans.
Speaking of Star Wars and stuff, I need to show everyone. We are going to talk about abortion, but we like to go. We do heavy mood shifts here, and so we hit the shifter. So if you're not ready, does anyone know what this represents? What device this looks like, or what thing from Star Wars? Anybody? You know what that is?
That's the Death Star.
Okay, good.
I at least know that.
The Death Star, yes. Very similar to an abortion clinic, a Death Star. But what it does is it blows up whole planets. But this right here is a timer.
Nice.
And everybody, James has to leave at a certain time. So we're going to go ahead and set the timer for 60 minutes, right?
Yep.
All right. So
that's when I blow up.
Yeah, that's when he's going to blow up. So we just set it. Now, the whole time, it's going to be flashing like this, because remember, it is a space station.
Yeah, that's right.
And what's going to happen is, in the background, you guys are going to hear... You're going to hear... Yeah, it's like an egg timer. Dr. Funny's right. What you're going to hear is the Star Wars blasters and stuff. That means it's time for him to go.
Okay. I know if I start hearing blasters, I got to duck and get out of here.
Yep, so this is... we'll leave it right here for now. We'll leave it close to the microphone.
Nice.
And you guys, it's go time. Okay, so it's time to do this thing. I've called this Abortion 101. What we want to do is break down the truth about abortion and break down some very important arguments to equip you guys out there so you guys can be in the know on a very important topic. So, James, why do you think this is an issue that Christians, and I would even say people concerned with true right and wrong, should be concerned with? Why should we be concerned with this issue in the first place?
Well, we need to realize that there are 3,000 abortions a day in the United States. Now, if it turns out that abortion really is just removing a lump of tissue, it's kind of like getting a mole removed, something. If it's morally equal to getting a mole removed, well, then it's not that important that this issue is happening. But if it turns out to be the case, that it's actually taking the life of an innocent human being, well then we're talking about 3,000 essentially murders, 3,000 deaths of an innocent human being each day in the United States. And that's just in the United States. Mm-hmm. So about 40% of pregnancies in the United States end in abortion. So that's why it's so important to work through the moral issues, the bioethical issues involved, because if it turns out that abortion takes the life of an innocent human being, then we're talking about taking the life of an innocent human being on a massive scale. And so it has huge moral weight.
So that's pretty sobering when you think about it. And hopefully you guys understand why that's important, because if we want anything resembling a godly society, one thing you want is protection of the most vulnerable in the members of society.
Right.
And you also want laws that reflect objective moral principles, meaning the laws of a nation are actually based upon what's right and wrong.
Yep.
Because a law can be a law doesn't mean it's moral and all that.
Right.
So we need to discuss that, because abortion is legal in the United States. That doesn't mean that it's moral, of course. And so with that, you're going to talk about this very issue at Doctrine for the Block.
Yeah.
So everyone who's coming to the conference, you're going to actually hear James break this down in further detail at Doctrine for the Block. Can you tell, how did you get into this topic? Because there's a few apologetic topics you cover. You deal with atheism. You deal with science. You deal with this. How is this one of the ones that you personally got into?
Well, I think that in trying to understand whether the Christian worldview is true, the Bible makes certain claims about when the value of human life and how we evaluate the value of human life, and even makes specific claims about unborn humans. And so because of that, we need to, if we're going to defend Christianity, if we're going to evaluate whether it's true, well, we need to evaluate whether its claims that relate to bioethical issues are consistent with what we know from logic and what we know from science. And so this is just part of evaluating the Christian worldview.
All right. And so I'm glad you've taken the time to do that, and you've learned some good arguments. We're starting out Abortion 101. What's the first thing people need to know about abortion, James Umber?
Well, I think the first thing that we need to know is that I don't think there's any disagreement, for the most part. There's almost no disagreement that if abortion does take the life of an innocent human being, that we all agree that that would be wrong. That if it takes the life of a valuable human being, then we would say that that is wrong. It seems like typically the disagreement is whether the unborn is a valuable human being. And a unique human being sometimes is the issue that comes up, and sometimes personhood language comes up. Is this a valuable person? And all those different facets start to sound very complicated. You can start to bring in all sorts of issues of privacy, and before you know it, this issue starts to sound very complicated. But really, I think turns out it's quite simple. As Greg Koukl, a Christian philosopher, puts it, there's really only one question here. Is the unborn a living human being, a unique living human being? And if we can answer that, well, then we can actually answer the moral question, because pretty much everyone agrees that it would be wrong to take the life of an innocent human being.
So people who support legalized abortion, they would say either there's some people who say it's not human, and right. Usually it's people who don't know as much about the issue, but then other people will say, well, yeah, but it's not a person,
right,
or it's not valuable, or some other consideration,
right,
the woman's bodily autonomy. Explain how the pro-choice, pro-abortion side, what they say about what you just said. You're saying it's a human being. Well, what do they say?
Right. So currently, I think one of the most common objections is really that the unborn is not a valuable person. That this is, yeah, okay, we understand that this is a human being. This is a human life. And if we look at the genetic code of the unborn human life, it's a unique genetic code. So we're talking about a unique person. But they would say, well, or unique individual, a unique human life, but they would say this is not a person. Now, this strategy of bifurcating living humans into two categories. On one hand, you have human persons, and on the other hand, you have non-persons, living human non-persons. This is a very dangerous a strategy to take, and unfortunately it's a very common strategy by the pro-choice or pro-abortion side. And so once we start to say, well, we can actually separate humanity into these two categories, some are non-persons, unfortunately that has a very sad history. We saw that in the early Americas. We saw that black people were considered non-persons. We see that language in Nazi Germany. And so my point is not to just lump the pro-abortion, pro-choice side in with Nazis, that sort of thing. But my point is just that we need to be very cautious when we start to rely on personhood language and start to say that humanity can be divided into persons and non-person, living human non-persons.
All right, so if you guys are tracking, you'll see that when we say human being, in essence, in one way of thinking, that's at least a physical or scientific category or classification. Now, I don't think it's demonstrated at all that you can separate human beings out from persons, okay?
Yep.
But the way a more sophisticated pro-choice or pro-abortion person would look at it is, yes, they understand scientifically these are human beings. Now, the person on the street you might talk to might say that's not a human being, and
right.
So we should talk about that at some point.
Okay.
In fact, I saw someone asking in there, when does the fetus become a human being?
Right.
So we should address that. But if you notice, person the idea there is almost a philosophical or perhaps even legal category.
Right.
So when you meet a pro-abort person who says, yeah, they're human beings, they're recognizing the science is unassailable on that point. You can no longer get away with what you could get away with, but now that we've mapped the human genome and you got all this 4D ultrasound, it's obvious human being, right?
Right.
I think it was really pretty much always obvious, but it's more obvious than ever now.
Yeah.
But they'll say, well, yeah, human being, but not a person.
Right.
When personhood is conferred upon an individual, then they have certain rights and statuses granted to them. But the fetus or the embryo or the zygote, they are human beings, but not persons. So we're getting a little bit complex, but this is the more kind of sophisticated way some of the pro-aborts argue.
Right.
I'm sure you've heard that. How do you respond to those kinds of discussions?
Yeah, I think the main thing that we need to think about is on what basis are we going to divide humanity into persons and non-persons? And you're going to need some sort of test, a test by which you can differentiate between human persons and human non-persons. And this test is usually going to, the test that divides human persons and human non-persons typically falls into one of four categories. And so there are bioethicists who've referred to this as the SLED test, and each letter is a different point in this acronym, SLED. And so just about every objection, I think every objection that I've found to, or every criterion by which people divide humans into persons and non-persons, either involves a division based on size, that's the S, or based on level of development, that's the L, or based on environment, that's the E, or based on degree of dependency, and that's the D. One of those four categories. And so, for example, I was reading just earlier today someone objecting to some of the fetal heartbeat laws as they've been referred to. And someone said, well, yeah, but you have to understand this isn't a human person because it's only so many millimeters long. Well, that's judging who is a person and who is not a person based on size. That's the S. In that case, human value is granted based on your size. So in that case, someone who is much larger would be more valuable than maybe someone who's smaller. And where do we draw that line? I think this is a very dangerous criterion and actually has huge implications because you start to end up saying that there are non-persons because they're just too small to be a person. And so it goes right on down the line with level of development.
Well, so with size,
Yeah.
Everyone should stop and think about that because
Right.
people will say, they'll say something about the size at whatever stage, because when you say fetus, that is supposed to just be simply a name for humans at that stage of development.
Right. Yeah.
So fetus is not necessarily a bad word. It's just the
No.
pro-abortion side has taken it and almost hidden behind the Latin, because fetus is Latin,
Right.
to dehumanize. But fetus just means small little human being, tiny person.
Right.
And so there's nothing wrong with saying fetus because that is the appropriate scientific name for a human at that stage of development.
Right.
But the thing is, they only want to say fetus, or even worse, products of conception. And so they'll use fetus, embryo, zygote, right? But if you go on later on, toddlers, that's a name for humans at a stage of development.
Right.
Part of it's based upon their size, even.
Yep.
Part of it.
Yeah.
In a manner of speaking. So the point is, if you hear people talk about, well, the small, and you can barely see it, and then you got to ask yourself what's the relevance. How does size in any way become a criterion? And it really doesn't. And here's what's crazy. Even at the first trimester, which is even that in itself is sort of a made-up category in a way by the Supreme Court, but this idea of trimester, so you get the first 3 months, most abortions don't happen until usually after 30, 40 days, and it makes sense why. It's not like they happen on the 40th day, but the 40th day is significant because that's usually when heartbeat starts, and that's why he was mentioning earlier, some states are trying to pass laws to say if something has a heartbeat, you can't abort it, right? Which is crazy. You think about pro-abortion, so amped up in their, support for abortion that they're willing to say, no, it doesn't matter. Because they know it's true, that it is a true fact. Every abortion stops a beating heart. The exceptions would be RU486 or some of the abortion pills, I guess. But it doesn't mean anything less by it. But it's interesting. I've heard this new language. Check this out, James. I don't know if you've heard this. Because of the fact that almost every abortion stops a beating heart, except for the chemical abortions.
Right.
Some pro-abortionists now have taken to the language of referring to the heartbeat of the unborn as embryonic pulsing.
Right.
Embryonic pulsing, ladies and gentlemen. Your arguments have problems when you have to douse it in euphemism. And the pro-choice side is an expert at nothing else if not using euphemisms to describe what they're really trying to say. Real quick shout out to my main man, Mr. Phil Fox, for the super chat. We need to maintain our passion for the subject and our compassion for those who have chosen to go through this. It's hard to maintain both the passion for the baby and the compassion for the mother.
Yes.
Thanks, Vocab, for taking on this heavy subject. Appreciate it. I'm glad I could have Mr. James Umber here to do that today. And thank you, Mr. Phil Fox. So, in that acronym SLED, we got S, size. It's very easy to remember SLED, and it's very easy to remember listen for key words where someone is making part of the argument, the size. But that's not the end of the acronym. So what else would we got, Brother James?
So then we have level of development, which really relates, like you were saying, size really has a strong relationship to level of development, because a fetus we typically think of being a certain size, but fetus, like you said, is a level of development. And so we might say, well, and I've read objections that say, well, this is a fetus, this is not a valuable human being, or this is not a human person, this is instead a fetus. Well, instead, like you said, that's just a different developmental stage, just like a toddler, like an infant. And so this is not a test by which we determine someone's value. In that case, a toddler would be less valuable than a teenager, and a teenager would be less valuable than a full-grown human. To use this as a criterion by which we determine a human, whether a human is actually valuable or not, is extremely dangerous. And why is it at that particular stage and not some other stage that we suddenly pass on value? Instead, the Christian point of view is that all humans are intrinsically valuable. Just in being a human, a living human, you have value. And so, and I think really the way we talk, our moral language really reflects that. And so I would encourage all my pro-life friends out there, when you're talking about a fetus, it's okay to use the term fetus, but when it comes time to use a pronoun for the fetus, I say she. Now, it could be a he, but it's either going to be a he or a she. It, I think, devalues and kind of dehumanizes the fetus. Mm-hmm. Instead, the fetus, is going to be already has a determined sex. And I guess someone could object that there are these very rare cases where you have an XXY or I believe it's a XYY. You have a few rare conditions like that. But really, when we're talking about the majority of cases, the vast majority of cases, we're talking about either a he or a she. So the fetus, she's a valuable human being.
Yeah, and here's what's wild is that I think even in and of itself is ultimately a distinctly Christian, maybe a person might want to say Judeo-Christian or biblical value ultimately. If you're coming from an evolutionary worldview, it's very difficult to somehow imbue or give, so to speak, this understanding of you have value and worth just by inherently who you are, what you are, not what you can do or anything like that. You have to say, if you're going to use evolutionary measures, which I don't know what other measures you have, if you have a materialistic or evolutionary background, it's a difficult road to say every human life is intrinsically valuable and worthy. Now, with that being said, most people understand there's something wrong with murder. Most people understand this. And so I think it's a very, every now and then there is an organization, Atheists for Life, you know,
Right.
and every now and then you see atheists who are pro-life because they do understand that, right? But most pro-abortionists usually don't argue, well, murder's okay anyway, and so don't worry about it. You know, most of them, usually speaking, don't argue that way anyway.
Right.
But it's a different kind of argument they're making. But, you know, some of what we're saying, you got to realize, oh, wow, even that, you know, is that it should be obvious, you know, every human life. And if you look, the trend is to get life at the beginning and now at the end. So look at all these euthanasia laws in Europe, but some in the United States. They don't really show, I don't think, a value for life that's no longer basically able to contribute financially. You know, they just don't. And that does get close to a Nazi idea of calling people like that useless, non-producers or useless eaters. You know, these bottom feeders who do nothing but consume for whatever reason, you know.
Right.
And so this is a deep, deep moral issue that touches on all kinds of subjects. Shout out to Dr. Funny for the super chat. He says, amen to brother Mr. Phil Fox. I completely agree with his comments and sentiments. I love the sinners and hate the sin. We want to change hearts and tell the truth in love. Amen, brother. Yep. And so were we kind of leaving off at level of development? Is that where we were? Let's go ahead and continue on that track, Mr. James.
All right. So the next letter in the acronym is E for environment. Now, this is, unfortunately, usually the way the discussion goes, I've found, is that a pro-choice, pro-abortion person may be talking about size, and you bring up the point that is size really the criterion that we're going to use, then they might move to level of development, or that usually comes out naturally, and you can talk about how this is not a valid criteria by which to decide who's valuable and who's not. And then really what it comes down to, it seems like often what I've experienced is that most people really want to say, well, if this living human is inside the mother, then she's a valuable human being. But if this living human is outside the mother, then she is now she's a valuable human being. She was not before, and now is. The short path down the birth canal, to say that is actually what changes this living human from a non-person, non-valuable living human to a valuable human with all the rights and all the value that we think of humans having, is entirely arbitrary. There's nothing about that short movement, less than a foot, that would actually cause someone to go from being not valuable to being now a valuable human person. And so I think environment it's almost as if we can't see this living human, they're not a person, they're not valuable. Well, in that case, you know, if the baby was delivered, but delivered into a, you know, black trash bag so that you never saw the baby, it's almost morally equivalent, because you still no longer see this human, this living human is still not visible. And so I think this is an entirely arbitrary way to decide who is valuable and who is not.
Yeah, so the S is size, the L is location. Location.
Oh, I may have. Oh, okay.
Right? Isn't that right?
Or is it level of development and environment?
I don't know. Oh, hold on. I'm messing it up.
I think so.
Yeah. When I heard you say the birth count, I was like, wait. So level of development, E is environment, which is like location, and D. Okay. Anyways, my bad. What I meant to say is, because I said it earlier, but then I second guessed myself. S is size. L is level of development, right? Right. Okay. So we're discussing level of development and kind of getting a little bit into environment. I think you heard him mention. my man Dr. Funny says all of medicine will draw the line at viability, which is usually around 28 weeks.
Right.
Well, I don't know. I guess to a certain extent, it depends what you mean by draw the line at, because abortion is legal in all 3 trimesters. Now, I think we should recognize you could say abortion becomes more difficult in a variety of ways, legally and finding availability. The bigger the baby is, the further it's developed.
Yes.
But it's not illegal for the most part. I mean, the pro-abortionists have a very difficult time, the lawmakers especially, regulating abortion at all. And so they don't like any kind of curtailing of what are called partial birth abortion legislation. So they definitely don't like partial birth abortion bans. And you can see this time after time again. You would think when it comes to this partial birth, which they don't even like that term. They like to use the technical term, okay, whatever. But it is a partial birth because, they flip the baby around, feet first, and then they do their business, and it's pretty grisly.
Yeah,
but all 9 months. Now, yes, majority of abortions aren't at the 9th month. That's true. But it's interesting. Most pro-abortionists love to talk to us, pro-lifers, this way. Well, what about in the case of rape or incest?
Yes.
And those are important things to discuss, but they almost automatically go to the exceptions right away.
Right.
But when we talk to them, and if we bring up partial birth abortion, which I bet you, if I had to look at the stats, I bet you partial birth abortions are less rare than people getting abortions for incest. I would almost bet. But we'd have to see. You know what I'm saying? I'm just telling you, I don't know. Maybe Gutenmacher or whatever could tell us that. But, it's interesting the way that works. And so the other thing about viability, which is the idea if they can survive at the outside as far as breathing, they obviously still can't feed themselves.
Yep.
Their viability seems to be based mainly upon the idea, can they breathe on their own?
Right.
But it's really, what I've seen is lower and lower and lower. 28 weeks is like, but really we're down to 20, 21 weeks because there's multiple cases of 20, 21 weeks. I know people personally at 21 weeks, the babies are born. Yeah, it's a high-risk situation, but there's still viability really early now, and part of it has to do with advances in medical technology. Right. So in a way, the concept of viability varies state to state, geographical location to geographical location, because some of it's based upon the medical equipment that you have on hand in even the era or decade that you live in. Right? Viability is less than it was. So if you have this weird changing standard of people make it about viability, I don't know. Maybe you want to comment some on the viability part since that was brought up.
So my understanding is that the Roe v. Wade decision really uses this viability language quite a bit. And really, viability is another word or falls into the category of our last category. So this actually works out really well. The D in SLED is degree of dependency. And viability really is about the degree of dependency. Now, the reason I use the term, and these bioethicists who've put together this acronym, the SLED test, the reason I use the term degree of dependency is because dependency doesn't just end at birth. Instead, like you mentioned, the infant still needs the mother and still needs care. In fact, oftentimes, there are many cases where an infant is born and needs medical care to continue to stay alive. And so there are these degrees of dependency. Even in a lot of ways, it seems like even teenagers are dependent on their parents quite a bit. That's a little bit of a joke, but you get the idea. I mean, it's this degree, it's this spectrum of dependency that slowly fades away as the child grows up. So there is no one point right at birth where all of a sudden they're no longer dependent. No, instead there's actually a high degree of dependency right there from the beginning of birth. And so it's a continuum. It's a continuum from before the baby is born and even after the baby is born. It's just a continuum of dependency. So I think this viability language is really quite dangerous. And we start to see people divide viability, say, oh, well, breathing. Well, okay, but then what do we do in the cases of infants that are born who need assistance in breathing? Okay, or even their lungs to be cleared. Okay, well, it's so we can we can divide viability into particular areas where the infant is dependent, but still, we're talking about different degrees of dependency, and this is not a reasonable way to decide who is valuable and who is not valuable.
Yeah, as far as clinics that still do abortions in the third trimester, the most famous, or I really think infamous one I know of, is in Boulder, Colorado. Dr. Warren Hearn. And he has been around a while, and so he has spoken at various events in relationship to this. And he has some handbooks, manuals, really training other doctors on how to do these kinds of things. And what's crazy is some of the pro-life authors and activists have got a hold of some of this stuff. And so you can actually see materials written by Dr. Warren Hearn or listen to some of his speeches where he describes some of this stuff in great detail. And listening to him describe how to perform a late term abortion is a very, you don't have to look at any pictures or images, just hearing him describe it is one of the worst. It's very difficult to even read them. But Warren Hearn, look him up, Boulder, Colorado. In fact, I found a story a little bit about it from April 30th, 2019 on NPR about abortion at third trimester, and they do mention him as well, Dr. Warren Hearn. And here's what's crazy. If you say up to birth, it's each state does some different laws, but New York's got it. And here's an article in the Christian Post that talks about there's a bunch of states trying to work out laws where there's no gestational limits on abortion. Alaska, Colorado, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, I mentioned New York, Oregon, Vermont, and D.C. And I'm not sure what the progress has been on this since then. This is from January 2019, so about a year ago. And they actually mention as well that Warren Hearn's Boulder Abortion Clinic in there. And the other most famous one is Curtis Boyd's Southwestern Women's Options in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Those are two that have clinics that perform abortions up to 32 weeks and later, they say on a, quote, case-by-case basis. And so, yes, it's less, yes, it's rare, but the fact that it's legal and allowable, and the fact that it's very difficult to get pro-abortionists to make any kind of curtailment of it is pretty ghastly. And just listening to it, you're like, oh, yikes. Because, there's some big babies. You're talking some big babies at that point. But I know some pro-life advocates who part of what they do, James, is they focus or specialize in showing the images of abortion. Right. Now, there's debate in the pro-life community if you should do that or not. And for the February 2020 supporter-only upload I'm going to do, it's going to be a special, because I do, for supporters, I do these exclusive links, and I'm going to do one that's all about should we use images in the abortion debate. So you guys who are supporters, stick around, because the February upload is going to be about that very discussion, so you guys will be able to hear that. And so there's a debate amongst the pro-life community about that. But the people I know who do that, which ultimately, as long as you do it responsible and ethically, I agree that it should definitely be part of the arsenal. Otherwise, what are we really talking about here? Right. And so within that, he specifically makes almost all of the photos they use of abortions or baby development within the first trimester, since that's where most of them happen. He doesn't usually show the later ones, which are more grisly and more ghastly, because that's not where most abortions happen, and he wants to be like, this is what this. So you see the baby with the hand on the quarter, for example, where you have the quarter to understand the scale, and the little baby's hand is on it, and the arm is dismembered, severed right about there. That is within the first trimester. That little baby's hand, and so this is not a blob of cells, which is a strange argument anyway, because even if it is, it's a blob of strictly human cells. And blob is almost just like an appearance argument, which doesn't make any sense. It's not just merely a clump of cells or a blob of cells or something unrecognizable. Almost always Oh, that's a recognizable human. And again, these new ultrasound technologies, which a lot of the crisis pregnancy center here, we got Choices in Arizona, they're utilizing some of this to show this is what your baby looks like right now.
Right.
And a lot of women are really shocked and surprised about that. But have we covered all the points of SLED already?
Yep. So yeah, we sailed right through that. Yeah. So those are the four. So you have size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. And really, the objections, when someone tries to object that there are human persons and human non-persons, I think they really fit into those four categories.
Right, excellent. All right, I'm looking through the live chat. Do you guys have some questions you would like to ask James? I saw some questions earlier. But now's the time where you guys can ask James some questions here. What kind of things, you don't want to give it all away, but what besides what we talked about today are you going to talk about when you do your breakout session at Doctrine for the Block, your Friday night, so February 7th, 2020, your February 7th, which is Friday. What kind of things are the people in the class going to see and experience that you can't get through this?
So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the typical objections. There's so much that I haven't covered here having to do with privacy, having to do with all these different objections that the pro-abortion, pro-choice side brings up. And I'm going to show that how if we just work out this one question of, is the unborn a living human? Is this a human life? It really actually solves. It actually gives us answers to all these other objections. It even deals with this issue of rape and incest. It deals with this issue of whether women will go to back alley abortions. All of these actually end up not being answered directly, but all the answers all come from answering this one question: is the unborn a living human?
Right, that's the big one. And you're going to show some video, I believe?
Yes, I'm going to be showing some video from it's an interview with a doctor who used to perform many abortions. He was an abortion doctor, and by worldly standards was a very successful abortion doctor. But he has now changed his mind on the issue of abortion, and he explains really just the mechanics of what an abortion involves. Now, there won't be any photographs of an abortion or an aborted child, an aborted fetus. There won't be any video of any of the actual body parts or a video of an abortion, but instead there is a very diagrammatic depiction. It's just a series of diagrams that are really not gruesome in the sense that there's a lot of blood or
right.
That kind of thing, but instead it just explains in the most sort of benign way exactly what an abortion is.
Excellent. So I think people should definitely look forward to that. Doctor for the Block, James Umber will be there, and you want people to know about your activities. Obviously, if they're Arizona State, they can link up with you.
Yeah.
But let's say it's more through social media. How do they find your materials, Mr. James?
Yeah, so you can go to examined-life.org, and we have there a link to our Facebook and a link to our social media platforms there. Also for Ratio Christi, it's Ratio Christi ASU Tempe. That's our handle on Instagram and on Facebook. So check us out. We have a list of resources at examine-life.org, so that if you're looking for good, solid resources on the evidence for Christianity, there's a list of links there that I think will help you in your research. And so there are all sorts of resources that we provide there. So I hope you check it out.
Excellent. And everybody, this is spring water, not any other thing. Okay, so here's a question I'm going to put to you. Be interesting to see what you want to say about this. Fred Sanford, what does this do to a person's conscience for a doctor who does this? Are there any studies?
That's a really good question. One thing, we're bringing it from just a very objective sort of moral question. Now we're bringing it to the actual humans' lives who are affected, the women's lives who are affected. And like some people have said in the comments, I do want to make sure we emphasize, and I'll be emphasizing this at Doctrine for the Block, that we do need to have compassion. These are difficult situations. We do need to answer the moral question separately. You have to understand what the moral equation is first before you know how to approach people who've been in this situation, because it's going to make a difference in how you approach. But we still need to have compassion. So I did want to emphasize that. But I do think that I assume that what Fred Sanford there is talking about is, what does it do to a person's conscience to actually be involved in an abortion? So we could talk about the abortion doctor, or we could talk about the woman who is involved, or we often forget about the men who are involved. There are oftentimes, or there, I don't know the statistics, but just from anecdotal, just from hearing the stories, there are men involved who help make this decision and actually sometimes push the woman into, hey, you should really have an abortion. What does it do to their conscience to be involved in that? I think it can actually start to sear the conscience, which means start to deaden or numb the conscience. Just like with any of us, as we get involved in sinful behaviors, we do things that we know are wrong, we really start to damage our conscience, and it makes it easier to be numb to the wrongness of those activities. And so that's something that should be another area of compassion. We should realize that people who've been involved in abortions, whether it's the doctor, whether it's the mother, whether it's a father, a grandfather, whatever, the other people who are involved, we have to realize that this is having a searing effect, a numbing effect on the conscience, and we need to have compassion there and understanding and recognize that there are places in our lives where we've seared our conscience a little bit, and where we've become numb to how wrong some of the things we do, how wrong that is. And so just have that compassion, that understanding.
Amen, I agree. And people in the live chat are agreeing as well, so that's good to see. We got some great comments. Dr. Funny, for example, says there are numerous studies that look at residual effects of traumatic events and how they impact doctors. Some retrospective papers on moral injury, PTSD, mostly case studies about abortion. Wow. Yeah, so that's interesting. I always like seeing the different perspectives. You know, we got all kinds of great people in here. Mel Olivius, I believe, earlier, because she heard the interview that I aired, which was like a flashback interview, where back in the day, I don't even know if you weren't on that particular one. I don't know if you remember this, but I had Sean White and I had Marty Clapp on one time. Good. And we had discussed Smart Faith when it was first starting up, and so I had re-released that audio so people could hear about it, edited out the irrelevant parts, for 2020. Right. But because of that, a good thing happened is people in Arizona are aware about Smart Faith, and so somebody wants to know, are you guys still doing the Smart Faith conference this year?
Yep, my understanding is it's on. We're still doing it. I'll check with, Sean White is the mind behind that.
And he'll be at Doctor for the Block as well.
Yeah, he'll be there. And, man, that guy is, he's working hard. He's working on his PhD dissertation. So, that's why I say I think that it's on, because with as much as he has on his shoulders, on his plate, I can't imagine doing that. So I'd want people to leave it open for me to cancel. Just because.
What year would this be? It's the 5th or 6th?
Oh my goodness, it's more than 6. Really? I think we're up to 7. Yeah.
And it usually takes place what month?
So this is usually just before summer. So I would look for it in about April. We try not to conflict with tax deadline. That's a busy time.
You guys usually do it in April?
But yeah, I think around April. Sometimes I think it hits May. If it jumps around. I think we've hit March sometimes. I think typically though April. I would look for it then. Yeah.
And then what about Deep Faith? That's another one. Are
Yeah.
there any other local ones people should know about? If they're
Yeah,
in
so
Arizona?
the Deep Faith Student Apologetics Conference usually happens in the fall. Students from junior high up through high school are all welcome, and really we don't check IDs at the door. So the fact of the matter is, each of the speakers at Deep Faith really try to take the same material that we would present to adults and really just provide more. Try to make it a little bit more dynamic, try to provide more stories, but really it's the same material, and we don't put it on a low shelf for the students. We help them rise up to that material. So the Deep Faith Conference, if you're interested, check out the website Deep Faith Apologetics, and I would go ahead and look to see if those topics that are coming up now, we probably don't have the topics up yet, but watch for it and see if those topics look exciting to you and like something you should know. And feel free to come and enjoy the information and their breakout sessions. And it's just some awesome information being passed on to people through all these great conferences.
Excellent.
Including Doctrine for the Block.
So yeah, it's Doctrine for the Block, Smart Faith, Deep Faith. And Robbie does one, or is that with...
So Robbie's is Deep Faith.
Okay,
yeah.
so there are 3 that we know of?
3 major conferences, yeah. And then,
Other ones pop up.
Yeah, other ones pop up here and there. I know that Dr. Daniel, I think B. Wallace, the world-renowned New Testament scholar, he's coming next month. And he's coming to Tempe, so watch for things like that. Man, all the time there's great information being passed on so that you're prepared to defend your faith, or if you're someone who's trying to investigate different worldviews, well, these are great ways to understand the Christian perspective and explore the Christian worldview.
Amen, amen, amen. Shout out to Google user. And I appreciate your compliment. Thank you for the super chat as well, Mr. Google user. All right, an important question that comes up a lot by Carol. What if the pregnancy puts the mother at risk? What to do? All right, James, I'll give you the easy question.
All right, yeah. So if there is a case, now this is a matter of moral reasoning. We find that when we start to think about moral reasoning through moral issues, we run into what are called moral dilemmas. These are situations where, well, if I do A, I can only choose between A and B, and if I do A, something immoral happens. If I do B, something immoral happens. Well, choosing the lesser, usually it's referred to as the lesser of 2 evils. I would actually refer to it as the greater good, because if you have to choose between one of those 2, then by choosing the lesser of 2 evils, you're actually choosing the greater good. It's you have no other option, and so that's actually a virtue to choose the lesser of 2 evils, as it were. So if it's down to the mother is going to die or the unborn baby is going to die, and you have to choose between the 2, well, then this becomes a very difficult moral dilemma. But here's the thing. You have to understand, I don't want to say that there is no case, because my knowledge, my medical knowledge is limited, but I have heard of no case where that actually happens. What's typically thought of is a situation like an ectopic pregnancy, right, where it's either both die or the infant or the unborn child dies. So we have to either choose: do we take the life of the unborn baby, or do we let both die? Well, in that case, the moral dilemma is easy to solve. Let's take the life of the unborn baby, and the mother can continue to live, rather than let both die. And so if that's the moral dilemma, so whenever you hear about these situations, look into the exact condition and see, is this a choice between one life and another life, right, or is this a choice between losing both lives or just losing one life?
Yeah, ectopic pregnancy is pregnancy outside of the uterus.
Right.
And because of that, when the baby begins growing, it can basically kill the mother.
Yes.
Because it's happening in the wrong place. Smash her internal organs and make her bleed to death internally, right, and things along those lines. My understanding, I just looked up some stats on it, fewer than 200,000 cases per year in the United States.
Okay.
It's still tragic, and that's a result
yeah.
of the fact that we live in a fallen world. So people get cancer, and ectopic pregnancies happen, and all these, it's a Genesis 3 world. So it's not ideal or not good, but the thing is to recognize it is a legitimate moral quandary, because we recognize that life is inherently valuable, and we recognize that extends, meaning covered by as well, and I hate to even put it that way, but I'm saying that because of the nature of the discussion, to the unborn humans amongst us.
Yes.
And so that's why it's a legitimate situation for us to look at. And thank you for bringing that up, Carol. Appreciate that. All right, so looking at the timer here, and I'm trying to see what other questions we've got. I think you've done excellent so far. Real quick, there's other things. Last year you dealt with creation and evolution at Dr. for the Block.
Yeah.
And could you, before we get out, I'd like you to maybe say one thing about how that went last year, and then transition, since it's another one of your areas, into some other stuff you do. So if people like you, they could check out some of your other stuff as well.
Sure.
So how was that, and what other kind of stuff do you do besides that?
Yeah, absolutely. So last year I covered this issue of the typical evidence that's given for evolution, and does that really support the theory of evolution? Does that actually justify the theory? And basically what I concluded is that the typical evidence that's given, it falls far short of establishing the theory of evolution. And so by evolution, I'm talking about Darwinian evolution, the idea that life began on Earth billions of years ago through the random combination of chemicals, and then that first simple life then changed or evolved into all the organisms on Earth today through the process of mutation and natural selection. And so that's the typical definition. That would be neo-Darwinism. If you change the mechanism from mutation plus natural selection, then you have a different form of Darwinism. But the point is that this typical evidence is not adequate to support any of those Darwinian theories. And so I think that this is a critical issue, because this is what our students are taught in public schools, in a lot of charter schools. We see that they're taught this often uncritically. In fact, almost across the board, uncritically. There are no objections, legitimate objections that are raised to the theory. Yet in the secular scientific world, we see a lot of secular scientists raising objections to Darwinian evolution. Even if they believe in evolution, they still hold to it. They're saying, hey, there are a lot of problems that we need to work out. There are conferences that are happening, that have happened even recently. There have been large conferences where scientists are trying to work through the mechanism, saying that the mechanisms we're trying are not working. They don't actually cause evolution, like common descent, that everything is all related through these changes. And so I think these are significant problems that students need to know about, that our young people need to know about. And I think, so what I'm doing on that issue is I speak to that here and there. I don't have that topic coming up anytime soon, but I would recommend checking out examine-life.org. We do have an article there about the evidence for God, and design, of course, is one area of evidence for God. Really, this issue relates directly to that. Also check out some of those resources that we have listed there, because there are links to organizations that have a large number of PhD scientists that are raising legitimate concerns to the theory of evolution, and they do a good job of explaining it at a level that we can understand, those of us who are not PhD scientists. So I appreciate that. They take it and make it easy to understand for us, so that we can enter into that discussion and really start to understand both sides.
Excellent. He's got all kinds of great work, and we got some very insightful comments. People are kind of opening up about a lot of things, and that's why I'm glad we can kind of have a community here on the internet. I know it's a public forum, but we do what we can by God's grace. And Mr. Phil Fox, and again, thank you for the super chat, says, my wife was in that situation. Mm-hmm. So he's talking about pregnancy outside the womb.
Okay.
Her body was shutting down, and she was going to die if she carried to term. Yeah. I told her that was not a traditional abortion, but a rescue mission.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, and so, Dr. Funny agreed with those sentiments as well. And so, yeah, it's a serious thing. And, man, so yeah, I saw all kinds of people talking about all kinds of stuff, including people speaking of, I was pro-abortion and I became a Christian and now I'm not. The Lord changed my mind on that.
Right.
Or people that before I was a believer, I had an abortion, and all that. And so it's very, very interesting to see people's comments.
One thing I just wanted to mention real quick is we need to realize that when we talk about this issue, it's easy for it to be perceived as us trying to condemn someone who has had an abortion. And sometimes people will start to see us as almost as if by talking about these moral issues that we're trying to come down really hard in a condemning way on that person, like
Right.
we're zeroing in on them. Really, the whole point of the cross, the whole point of Christ's message, the gospel message, is that there is forgiveness. We're all sinners. We've all done wrong things. This is not an issue of singling out one person's immoral decision and trying to just focus on that. No, we're all guilty. And so there is forgiveness through the cross. And so I think that needs to be at the forefront of this discussion, and I'll make it a forefront of the discussion there at Doctrine for the Block, because the forgiveness that Jesus offers is so important in realizing that we can talk about what's right and wrong without saying that I'm singling you out and condemning you, this one person, condemning this one person because they've had an abortion and because I haven't. No, I'm a sinner. I've done all sorts of wrong things, and I need forgiveness just as much as everybody else.
Amen. Amen, 100%. And so I think that's important, and that is true. And, I was at the March for Life. Some of you guys saw on my Instagram, I shared some pictures. I was at the March for Life, Arizona on Saturday. Yeah. And there was a lot of good information, a lot of people. And there are people there, who wore shirts like, I regret my abortion. Wow. Or I forget how it was worded. I might say it too long, but something like, I regret giving up on fatherhood or
Wow.
something like that. A father who was involved. One of the guys who I went with spoke about how when he was like, he's like, man, 30 years ago, I was an unbeliever. And, I had my girls, different women, I was get all kinds of abortions. I didn't think of anything
Wow.
of it.
Wow.
It wasn't even a consideration. I didn't even know that was a thing or a problem. It's like
Right.
now, I realize and see. And it's cool to see God's grace. Now he's there marching and walking at a pro-life rally in downtown Phoenix, Arizona. But he had no idea. So I bet you, if you went to your average pro-life rally, I bet you would find 100, depending on the size of the crowd, but you would find a large percentage of that crowd who would say, yeah, I was involved in this way. So,
Right.
so just know, with most people in the pro-life community, especially born-again believers in Jesus Christ, who live and understand and embrace the gospel, if you speak about this or honest and talk about these things, it's not, condemnation and shame.
Right.
That's not how it is at all. There's a lot of understanding, and it's a beautiful thing to see. And so, I even say this: Planned Parenthood doesn't, to my knowledge, I've never heard or seen, and I've asked about this a lot, doesn't offer post-abortive counseling services to women.
Wow.
But the Choices Pregnancy Centers and places like that, basically members of the pro-life community, are the ones who basically, in a manner of speaking, clean up the emotional mess.
Right.
Planned Parenthood and them, they don't like to admit that there's a problem.
Oh man, I'm blowing up.
You hear that? That's how it does it.
That's nice.
When
I like that.
When it's ready to go. So that's James's timer, by the way. It means he's got to be leaving here. But they're the ones who kind of come behind and clean up the mess because they
Right.
care about the women. Ultimately, we're saying this is murder, taking of life, but abortion is not friendly to the mothers either. And that's just not really fully recognized to their emotional or a lot of times even their physical health. And that's just a fact of the matter. So final words, James, Umber, and then what I'm going to do is interact with the live chat, and then I'll probably do a freestyle to close out this show.
Sure. Well, hey, I'm just looking forward to Doctrine for the Block. It was a blast last year. Man, the food was good.
Oh, yeah.
camaraderie, the hanging out with everyone there was awesome. We had great discussions at the tables, and man, the speakers were awesome. I learned so much from the other speakers. So I encourage you guys to go. It's a very down-to-earth environment where you can ask questions and really wrestle with these things, and it's not like a bunch of intellectuals like just trying to talk over our heads, but which is what I need. In order to understand these issues, I need people to explain it in a way that I can understand. So, man, it's just a lot of fun. So I encourage you to go. I hope to see you in my breakout session, and I'm looking forward to the speakers. I'm looking forward to it, not for my session, but all the other sessions.
Right on, man. Well, me too, and some of the people in the live chat are going to be there as well.
Yeah, good.
All right, well, I wish you the best and everything you
right.
got going on. You got a great family there, man, and thanks for traveling down here.
Yeah, happy
guys,
to.
I'm gonna play a little song, and it's gonna be a little intermission. Wrong song. Hold on, this one right here. Hold on, guys. Yeah. Hold up. Just give me a second. I'm gonna play this for a second so I can go ahead and see my man James out. All right, so it's only gonna be for a little bit, and I'm gonna come back and answer your questions, and then get into a freestyle. So let's play that, and then James, I'll be joining back in here. Okay, you guys stick around, don't go anywhere. We got some minutes to show where, like I said, I'm gonna interact with you. So ask me your questions, and we'll get into some freestyles. All right. So James says, "Peace out."
Peace out.
model of good works, and in your teaching show integrity, dignity, and sound speech that cannot be condemned. With sound doctrine. With sound doctrine. With sound doctrine.
It's a blessing having James join us. He's a great guy. So, good times, good stuff. So let me just interact a little bit here with you guys, and then we'll do our freestyle, and then we'll see what's going on. Thanks for hanging in there. You guys are good peoples. And sorry, I knew you couldn't hear for a second, but we got that taken care of. Shout out to you, Liza, for the super chat. Thank you very much. Someone asked a question. Where'd it go? Hold on, what's the song called? That song is a beat provided by my main man Justin Martyr, and it's just an instrumental he gave me. Animal says, question, how are the stem cells cultivated that are used for stem cell therapy? Okay, so there was a time where I was real deep into pro-life apologetics, debating atheists on the topic and things like that, and I would have been able to answer that question better than I can now. And so I have a more limited scope of what I can say with certainty as far as up-to-date information and stuff like that. But I can say this, that if you're just saying stem cells, that's actually not a problem. And here's what I mean by that, Animal. They like to sometimes conflate and confuse this issue, but it needs to be bifurcated, split apart, separated out. Here's what I mean by that. Embryonic stem cells, these are the ones taken from, these are basically, I think the basic breakdown of it is, it's basically cloning humans in order to destroy them. In essence, to harvest them for some component of their physical makeup. So the embryonic stem cell situation, I think the more you look into it, you'll see is rife with ethical problems and something that Christians should not be okay with. But really, again, people who really care about right and wrong when it comes to ethics should not be okay with. Embryonic stem cell. Because, again, that's a situation where you have humans cloned to be destroyed. We're creating life to destroy the life, because then it gets repurposed. But it's treating humans as objects and means to an end instead of, an end unto themselves. So embryonic stem cell research and all the things associated and related to it are a problem we should not support, we should not be okay with. However, stem cells from adults are not a problem. And my basic understanding is that we've had better success when it comes to the ultimate end use of stem cells cultivated from adults than we have embryonic stem cells. And it seems like there's almost a strange obsession with using embryonic stem cells, even though it's mainly based upon the promise of some kind of future hope for therapy such as Parkinson's. But if you look into it, you realize we've had success without having to kill anybody on the adult side of things, where and this is where I used to be able to describe this in a little more precision and detail, but this is the point where I made the caveat in the beginning. That's all I could say for now. But embryonic stem cell research and all that, no. Adult stem cell research and all that, yeah. And that's really the main difference. And almost every pro-life ethicist that I've ever seen comes to the same conclusion. And so I hope that helps somewhat, but that's the deal with that. And then we've also got Liza saying freestyle time, and she sent another super chat, so you better believe it, that's right. And James is a great guy. He's a great guy, isn't he? And that guy says this question here. We're going to answer a couple questions on this issue of Abortion 101 before we get out of here. Since personhood depends on the feelings of the mother, and already after birth abortion is here, will the age increase? Over time, will people be killed for the convenience of others, like elderly? Well, that guy, unfortunately, when it comes to the elderly, that's already happening. There are certain places in the United States where this is really getting pushed, and I do have a concern that the more big government is involved with healthcare, that you have what have been termed by some as death panels, where they basically run cost-benefit analysis of people in in-term care, and decide, what are we going to do? Are we going to stop giving this person medicine? Are we going to encourage them to be euthanized and things like that? And it's a real thing. And I looked into this again when I was more deep into this issue, and that's a concern. So I'm starting at the end of your question where you said, like, elderly. So yes, the tendency of the secular left when it comes to medical ethics is to shave off life at the end and the beginning, where it's the most vulnerable and the weakest and the least valuable for capital means of societies. But you also have these situations where, of course, you've got people who want to die at a certain time and say, I'm going to have a suicide on this day. And more places are allowing this as well, which is, I think, the ultimate. It's part of this human autonomy, where we want to be in charge, not God. So God, you don't get to decide. Now, I know people don't literally say this, but I do think what drives it, it's this human ego of wanting to act as if we are truly dependent. And this human autonomy, I'll decide when I die. And if you look at a lot of people who do this, when they interview them, they do talk about things like that. They'll say, well, we didn't want a surprise. And there's story after story about this. So it's actually creeping more than you think. We are living in a brave new world. And there's a lot of important bioethics books by Christians. I think I've got a couple on the shelf actually right here. Let me recommend a couple since we're here. Oh. Since you brought this up. Okay, yeah. So, I just mentioned this. Joni Eareckson Tada and Nigel MDS Cameron. How to Be a Christian in a Brave New World. Pretty easy read. Good book. It's on Zondervan. I recommend that. Another one, Bioengagement. Making a Christian Difference Through Bioethics Today. So they'll cover not just abortion, but all kinds of other issues as well that are important. Biotechnology and the Human Good. And you see, this is on Georgetown University Press. Scott Ray, one of my former profs at Talbot, is there. And then here's another good one. Why the Church Needs Bioethics. Let's see, a guide to wise engagement with life's challenges. This is also on Zondervan. And for the best pro-life defense available in print that I'm aware of, it's Defending Life by Francis Beckwith, a moral and legal case against abortion choice. If you notice, this is different than the books I recommend. This is on Cambridge, by the way. This is different than the books I recommended on my talk on Wednesday, because that was for a very introductory audience. Those books are a little more high level, so there's some of that. So yeah, I do think we're going to see some slippery slopes come to fruition, and movies like 1984 and A Brave New World, and I'm forgetting some of the other movies that got into some of this. I think we're going to see actually some of this really go down. This is really wild. And yes, infanticide, which is sometimes called post-birth abortion, is being argued by certain ethicists and even medical professionals, again, usually from Europe. There's some Australians who became rather infamous for this with a journal article they wrote, and it wasn't a joke. And Peter Singer over at Princeton is famous for basically saying that all babies when they're born should have basically a return policy on them, where the first year the mother can decide. And then if she says nay, then you can take the baby out. This is in the literature, what I'm talking about. This is not just fringe stuff, okay? And so it's pretty bizarre. And, you bring up the point, since personhood depends on the feelings of the mother. Yeah, is the baby wanted or unwanted? That ended up making it life be either valuable or unvaluable, So it's pretty wild there. So let's see what else we've got here. I want to put some of your comments on the screen. I'm going to put some of your comments on the screen here. And I'm going to look through, and I encourage you guys to look at. Oh yeah, Gattaca. The Gattaca. I still gotta watch that. I hear people talk about that all the time. I need to watch Gattaca. Now, see, you guys are arguing about evolution. We just brought it up a little bit, guys. You guys, and then let's see what else we've got here. And depending on what we've got here, I'm going to. All the time. Eliza asks, are abortion clinics able to have moms sign off to donate the aborted baby's remains to give cells to research clinics? I arrived late, so I don't know if this is discussed. I don't know that exact question about, does the mom say, hey, I want this to happen or that to happen? I don't know. That's an interesting question. But I can say this. We have seen now through secret video recordings that Planned Parenthood does discuss the sale of baby parts. And the way it works is basically there's a chart about the cost of each baby part and the condition that it's in and how old it is and what level of development the baby was when it was murdered. And it's really ghastly. We're talking about human body part trade. Now, the way Planned Parenthood gets around it, in essence, is to say, we don't pay any. We don't get paid for selling body parts. We get paid for handling and shipping and things like that. And so it's like almost, this loophole. But have you guys seen the videos? These videos should be never forgotten. I forget the man, he was a Catholic man in California who was part of an organization, and they got some of these. His first name was David. They've been taking him to court nonstop, and he's getting in trouble, even though he, in essence, was doing investigative journalism. But it's center after center, director after director, trying to be fast and loose, real cute over salad, saying the most unimaginable things you could say. Even Planned Parenthood, to a certain extent, had to apologize, but they just apologized for the crass nature in which these things were discussed by their people, not really for what it was really all about and all that. Didn't admit wrongdoing and illegality and all that, but clearly it is. But instead, they're coming after David, and this just shows the messed up world that we live in. It's sad. And this came out. This is maybe 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, and there's still videos that come out. So I encourage you guys to watch those. If you don't believe me, you'll see, whoa, this is already going down. And I do know that aspect of it, but I don't know about the mother's involvement as far as how that goes. Yeah, Gerard Prey says, I believe they just passed an assisted suicide law in New Jersey. I think you are right. And Air Church says, Holland is notorious for getting rid of the elderly. And I do think you're right on that as well. And so this is, this is real stuff we're talking about. And, being an educated, supposedly wise society doesn't stop you if you don't have your morals and values in place properly. Melissa Levis says some vaccines are made from fetal tissue as well. Yes, but my understanding that's more of a complicated issue than it might first appear. it appears that there are 2 abortions that took place in the 1960s in which they developed what are called cell lines from these 2 abortions. So this is already a done deal. It's not good the way it happened, but this is the way it happened. These are both elective abortions that happen, I believe, in Europe. The cell lines that were developed were then essentially replicated time and time again in petri dishes. And some of those cell lines end up in about 6, is my understanding, modern-day vaccines. And sometimes vaccines get mixed, so you have ethically problematic vaccines with non-ethically problematic vaccines. Now, I know the second I talk about vaccines, people are going to go crazy, but I just don't have time to deal with y'all. I'm sorry, okay, to be honest. I don't mean you, Melissa, but I just don't have time to go there, really, to be honest. I'm not trying to do all that. But let me say this, that it's unfortunate the way it went down, okay? But these are not modern-day abortions that are happening that are getting put into vaccines right now. It's cell lines developed. And I don't think, from my understanding, because I've been trying to discern this, because I don't want to believe something just because it sounds bad or salacious. My understanding is these are cell lines not replicating, basically cloning humans. It's certain aspects. It's not like body parts or something like that, right? So what I mean by that, it's a done deal. It's a problem the way it came about, but it's not as if they're currently being unethically sourced, per se. I never ever want to quote Douglas Wilson in my life. You guys see where I came after him again in my life for what he said about slavery and all that. However, he did have a helpful blog that I've discovered in my discussion of this that was a pretty good blog about this, and he basically agreed with what I'm saying here, that that's unfortunate, but it's kind of done. And where are we at now? What does it mean right now with those vaccines if you should decide to get them? One specific one I remember that was a problem is rubella. That was one of the ones, and so that's a deal, okay, and that's a thing. But the Roman Catholic Church, who is extremely pro-life, they don't even believe, and I don't agree with this, by the way, with actual contraception. I don't mean abortifacients, like the pill, which actually induces chemical abortions in one of its mechanisms to stop the pregnancy. Contraception are things like condoms, for example. Actual prevent conception, contraception. My point is, they're not even with all that, and yet their people who deal with this have come out and said it's bad how it went down, but now that that's done, the good outweighs the bad ultimately. I mean, we've eliminated, by God's grace, whooping cough. I find that to be a good thing. And so that's something to look at and consider. I hope I don't miss any questions, but it's really difficult. There's so many questions here, you guys. I'm trying to get to the freestyle, but, it's difficult. You guys got all these questions. And there's that. No. I'm looking through your questions, guys. It's going to take me a second. I can't do all this, at once. Just give me a second here. I hope that helps, though. And don't they get out of bone marrow? I don't know the answer to that. But I'll put your question on the screen. Perhaps maybe somebody else does. Genesis Apologetics. Here, okay. Yeah, I've heard about the island. I think I saw it. Did I see it? Yeah. Let's see here. Fred, I hope you saw where I just did all the books. I don't know if you didn't see that before or after, but I just gave a bunch of books on that. I was going to ask how they get around that. I assume there are laws on that supposed to be done with the remains of aborted babies under DOH. Yeah, they just yeah. So that's a deal. Yeah, there you go. Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate it. Thank you, Lisa. David Daly, and that man's a hero. The man's a hero. Google his name. That man is a hero. And I can't believe what our society is doing to him. I cannot believe our legal system. I just don't even know what to think about that. It's just... Yeah. Hey, Google user, please stay on topic. You're all over. We're not talking about that anymore. Please, please, please. Just come back. Come back. I don't want to time you out. Maybe the moderators already have. You would deserve it, you know, seriously. Let's see here. Lisa says, I read where any contraception lower the value of human life. I understand that position and respect it. And a lot of birth control actually is an abortifacient, which is like it induces some kind of chemical abortion, all right? But, you know, I don't agree that any kind of contraception is wrong. But I understand people have different views on that. Richard says, I'm never taking another flu shot. I wasn't going there. And I don't think you have a problem with the fetal remains in most flu shots. You know, I always look into this stuff, but I do not believe the first thing I see when I come to some of this stuff. Thank you for the super chat, Zoc. You got a wild name. Oh, Mr. Phil Fox says, are we doing a book this month? I need to get right back on that. I'm going to try to do this for the next 2 months. Oh, look at Judah Line, the Hebrew Israelite hater, saying I dropped jewels. What? Hell has truly melted over. It is frozen right now. Oh, my goodness. Oh, you want to do the practice of the presence of God? Yeah, I read that book in college, actually. Yeah. All right. Okay. Keep it fertilizer. Yeah, see, Melissa Olivius, you sound informed on this. You're exactly right. And that is a form of that's not, those aren't okay because of that. It's a form of an abortion, essentially. It starves the little guy out, you know. That's what it does. All right, guys, we need to get to our freestyle. This has been a fantastic show. At the end, I was just looking at your comments, so, you know, it is what it is. But we got some dope beats by my main man, Jonathan Soko. And let's do these and have a great show. And I'm trying to work on having the homie oh wait, yeah. I gotta tell you guys something before I drop this. Gotta turn this up a little bit. Got this funky beat, yeah. Got this funky beat. Get this funky. Alright, let's okay. Yeah, check this out. Tomorrow night I'm going to be on John McCrae's channel. Oops, I need to change this. Here, let me change this right now. Tomorrow night, I'm going to be talking about Hebrew Israelism on John McCrae's channel. So, I don't know the time exactly, but we actually discussed this. And so, because of that, I might need to do another premiere on my channel. Because you guys know, up until Doctor for the Block, I'm doing a upload a day. And so, that's what's going on, all right? And thank you, guys. I think we had a great discussion. And you guys are people, a great audience, and these really serious things, you know, this stuff's no joke. All right, y'all ready? All right, I'm ready. Let's do this. 3, 2, 1, go. Yeah. 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 Florin. Discussion the grizzly abortion. It ain't easy, man. How to be so greasy, Warren. Out in Colorado, Boulder. What do I know? Folder. filled with grizzly, ghastly stuff that's nasty. If you wanna ask me, not that classy. How does he do it? He makes a lot of money. He sings the music of the siren song of convenience. Vocab Malone, this is not lean, it's water. Don't kill your daughter or your son. Why yata? Go to a rally every week. People out from the valley to the peak. I freak the so-go beat. He brought that heat, and you know it's neat to the beat. Yeah, I'm bobbing, I'm walking, rocking, discussing doctrine, often full of black. Are you shocked when we discuss these things when they say they're not a human? Jesus made me a new man. Now I'm coming again like, hello, new man. Seinfeld. Oh, okay, that's the end of that beat. That was a funky little beat. Let's do another one, man. That was good. All right. How's the volume, y'all? Let me know what's the volume, y'all. Here it comes. Soko, bring in the drums. Bing, bop, ba-boom, ba-boom, bum. Don't be dumb, don't be numb. Have a numb conscience, some like the likeness. Monster, often obvious. Abortion is murder. Peep this out now. Have you ever heard of? Guys know he's going to hell. Unless he gets saved, he'll get his bell rocked. His head will swell. Oh well. Jesus the Christ, the first Noel, can save you. No matter what you did. Even if you aborted your kid. And that's the truth. And that's the real. If you got an abortion, you did kill your own offspring. Now I sing an offering to Molech I bring. That's what you do when you go to PP and the crew. Planned Parenthood, dude, they not true. They like to lie. Excuse me, I say bye. Listen, no funding. Jesus the Christ is who I'm wanting. Tell you one thing, we must teach the youth. Here I come again when I speak this truth. They don't like it, might get me banned, but it's all good. They even say it's planned, but it's really not parenthood because they kill them, so it's not really parenthood. You know what I'm saying? Yo, but now I continue. Don't go to the venue unless you're gonna hold a sign like real men do. Talk about fatherhood. Yo, D-New says my levels are good, and that's real nice. Now I slice, I got a black mic with a red light. In the afterlife, you might see these babies both black and white, yellow and brown. Here's the sound of the flute. Yo, it's going down. February 7 all the way to 9. This is the end of the line. From the top of the mind, I'll be with what do you mean? Tomorrow, man, we the 18. It's obscene what they do to the babies. Shout out for Vocab and James and AZ.